Hey, what's going on, everyone? Kiodiekin here. I hope you're all having a great day. In today's video review, I know some of you were requesting some more Radxa X2L videos. And so what I decided to do was splice together or take a clip from one of my previous videos called Emulation Basics, Truth About Single Board Computers and Overclocking. So I will be showing you guys some clips today comparing the Raspberry Pi 5 to the Radxa X2L. And so for many of you who will believe, there's a lot of misconceptions about emulation, especially when it comes to these single board computers. And so my mission from more or less the last part of last year was to find out, how does emulation really work? How can we look at a single board computer and really tell if it's going to be that good emulation beast? And unfortunately, you know, a lot of people, a lot of reviews are singly basing their ideas on clock speed, the performance of the chip. We're looking at measuring tests such as Geekbench or whatever, and a lot of those tests are primarily fine, you know, they're okay, but there are a lot of numbering factors that go in part with emulation. If you guys have watched my Arcade Media video, I did even a comparison with PlayStation 2 emulation with the Raspberry Pi 5 compared to an 11th gen Intel based chip processor. Somebody had a video card running, I know it was an 11th or 12th gen chip, and I smoked them. The performance was, people didn't even believe that the other person was using a PC. But the bottom line is there's a lot of information and a lot of things that we still don't understand in terms of emulation, in terms of how they relate to a PC. If any of you went out and bought a PC, you know exactly what video card can do what processor chip, how much RAM you need, what it can do. But that's still a question in the single board community when we start talking about emulation and performance. And so in today's video, even though this is taken from my overclocking video, a lot of that information has been disseminated to show you what kind of performance you're going to get. And so you're going to see a side-by-side comparison with actual specs from using the system resource meter we are running Supreme Ultra on the Raspberry Pi 5, PlayStation 2 emulation. A lot of those settings have been applied to my maximum carnage image. And then of course, some of this is going to be defaulted speeds using Linux. So we are comparing Linux to Linux, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, using x86. So this is going to be a Linux x86 versus Linux ARM. And if you guys want to get really the best performance out of emulation using an OS, you need to use Android if you want to get the best performance out of it. So we're going to be taking a look at both of these single board computers today. Now keep in mind the Raspberry Pi 5 is valued at about $80. We are using a Pi 5 8GB using Supreme Ultra. And then on the Radxa X2L, we will be using Linux on x86 running Retropie x86, and that is a phenomenal build. I haven't even talked about it yet, which I definitely need to. And so the biggest difference with that is you will see if, or you know, how does the Radxa X2L outperform a Raspberry Pi 5 with little to no adjustments. And if you guys look at these specs, the Radxa XL2 measures on Geekbench somewhere at about 370 points, and the Raspberry Pi 5 can go up to about 7 something to about 8, maybe 900 or so, depending upon if you overclock. But for the sake of this video, we are not overclocked at all. Even if I did, it wouldn't matter, because overclocking doesn't work with emulation, because it's still not using the full aspect of the board, because the program is only still going to use so many resources. So all the optimizations you need to apply need to be in the emulator. Imagine bringing in a Christmas tree. You have a 10-foot roof in your house. You have a Christmas tree that's 7 feet tall, and then just out of nowhere you decide to build you knock the roof off of your house and make it 35 feet. Well, guess what? That 7-foot Christmas tree still would have fit in the house. There's no need to knock the roof off of your house, make it 35 feet instead of 10 feet, when the 10 feet is automatically going to do. But nevertheless, I'm going to show you guys a couple of games here. Again, this was taken from a live stream. I'm not going to edit it down so much. You guys can see the results for yourself on how x86 in most cases will outperform ARM. Forget the specs, forget your benchmarks, open up your mind to something entirely different, because a lot of times, even in the single board community, we still have this conception that, hey, I'm going to buy a more expensive board, or yeah, it has more specs, or it looks that way, but some of these boards still aren't developed to what they need to do. And x86 really has not been the forefront in the comparison on Linux versus x86 ARM and so forth. So we're going to take a look at some PlayStation 2 emulation again on the Radxa XL2. I made no adjustments whatsoever. You will see the difference for yourself. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so first off, we're going to start off with gameplay footage. This is from the Raspberry Pi 5, and then followed by that will be from the Radxa X2L. Obviously, that live stream I did was about 45 minutes or so. These two clips together should be about maybe 10 or about 15 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and move on with the rest of the live stream. Now, I'm not going to give you guys the additional commentary here. We're just going to go ahead and play the live commentary from that particular live stream, and you guys are pretty much get the gist of where we are going with this. Now, we all know that x86 is much more developed than Linux. Pretty much when we're working with Linux, it's dependent upon us to make it better. But the point being is that we're looking at two different price points. We're looking at the Raspberry Pi 5 or other single board computers like the Orange Pi 5, for example, retailing and selling for $79 versus another single board computer selling anywhere between $39 to $69. Now, the variant that I have for the Radxa X2L is the $69 variant. However, keep in mind, even the Atomic Pi, which is valued at $40 and came out back in 2019, can run NFL Blitz, Killer Instinct, and several other games perfectly fine with no optimizations or hiccups. So I am curious to see what that chip can do, for example, on that price point. But again, we're looking at the price point to performance. LA and streets of New York is back up. All right, so this is probably one of the more trickier games. This game kind of ran fine when you're on the inside. It has some other graphical issues when you start to run your character outside or when you're in a car. But this particular game is still beyond me. Now, if you notice here on the percentage meter, it will go anywhere between 2 frames per second, and then it'll jump back up to 100 as long as I don't move. But the second I start to move, it'll jump down to like 100 or 1 or 2 frames per second. No matter what I did, I still can't get this game to run. It's a pain in the butt. So again, I just want to show you. Now let's look in the background. CPU usage is 31% on the CPU, 28 on the RAM. Overclocking is not going to do anything for this particular game. Everything is going to be based entirely on the emulator. But there's probably still some better driver optimizations you could do with the Raspberry Pi 5. Orange Pi 5 may still run into this issue. I've never ran this game yet on the Orange Pi 5. But again, everything is it's a pain in the butt on this one. But everything is being optimized the best as I can on this particular game. But no matter what I did, if I turn left, right, move just a little bit, the game would just come down to a complete halt. So I'm standing still now. As you can see, the video percentage there is about 85% because I'm standing still. But the second I start to move around, it comes down to a complete crawl. Let's go ahead and fast forward. All right, there it goes. You can see it just decides to drop. It's completely unplayable at this point. And so that's one of the trickier things about using Ether or understanding PlayStation 2 emulation on these boards is that you have to play the game all the way through until you kind of find its weakest point in the game. A lot of these games will run perfectly fine, and then you'll run into an issue like this where it brings down the game to a complete halt. Now, most image makers, they'll probably pay a game for like maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or just copy somebody else's settings. But this is why you just can't add some settings. You actually have to be familiar with the game and understand where the bottleneck points are in some of these particular situations, because you have to account for this. Because in some cases, again, this is one of the reasons why I have to do the tutorial, because you may run into, out of the 4,000 playable games in the PlayStation 2 library, you're going to run into situations like that. And no one particular setting is going to be the end all be all for your particular situation. And so with this, you have to know the games. You have to know its possible choke points before you really release an image, because something like this is going to happen. I could have loaded this game up, said, "Oh, it ran pretty good or fine at the beginning of the game," and then you run into this little point here where it just comes down to a complete stop. I'm still playing around with it, but again, I never perfected it. But again, I'm just trying to show you guys some of the things that you would run into with the PlayStation 2 emulation. But again, I think this is probably a perfect test or a perfect scenario, because we've had NFL Blitz in the past, Killer Instinct. All of these single board computers coming out now have more than enough power, more than enough RAM and optimizations to run a lot of these games. But a lot of it still depends on what environment we're using, whether you're using ARM or x86. Oh, let me go ahead and back up here. So I moved past that point. I just decided to, bear it. And this is pretty much as playable as I could get it. All right, Pie Maniac. Time Splitter's Future Perfect runs great, but try to use the crane on level 2, and it's 2 frames per second on the Pi 5. Exactly. And Pie Maniac is another guy. He understands this emulation. He's somebody I've been talking to about the PlayStation 2 emulation, so he is aware of this issue, and he's speaking the truth, because it's taken us months to even get this far to understand it, to make it enjoyable to the point. And I haven't played that game yet on the Raspberry Pi 5 or the Orange Pi 5, but I could definitely relate. You'll run into some games that'll just chop down to about 2 frames per second, but it'll run fine in maybe the first few minutes or maybe the first level. So it's going to be up to you to understand how to use the emulator to make it enjoyable to the best of your experience.
Take care of it. Don't owe me nothing. Marcus, I helped raise you, and this is not how I expect to be repaid. Look, you can't keep doing this. You've had some scratches before, but this.
Hey, Maniac, do me a favor, message me that game so I don't forget, and I'll test it and try it out. I'm not going to do it now on the live stream, but I will do it in my own personal time when I can just really kind of stress test some things.
Now get the fuck out of here, kid.
All right, you guys see it's running great now. So we're at about 36 frames, 37 on the CPU usage, 40 on the RAM. And so again, I can't stress this enough, just how useless would overclocking be in this particular case, when the game itself isn't being, or the board itself isn't fully being utilized.
It's crazy, ain't it? Whoever thought I'd be making it.
And another thing I want to add too is a lot of these cutscenes, sometimes they have an effect on gameplay, sometimes they don't. A lot of these games are using MP4s, which are actually video files. So a lot of these cutscenes and demos will play fine, but in rare situations, you do have to play the game, or sometimes the game demo or the cutscene could truly represent the actual gameplay. So, but all in all, for consistency, you can't really rely on a lot of these video demos or cutscenes to determine whether a game runs good or not. So looking at this cutscene, this is probably an MP4. It's probably in a small video running in the back of the game. It has nothing to do with the actual true in-game experience.
Organized crime.
I remember when you couldn't even wipe your.
And if you look at the percentage on this, we're getting at 101 frames, 101% on the video frame per second, which is at 61 frames per second. So somebody will look at this, like let's say if this was the first thing you saw and say, oh, that game runs perfectly fine, but yet they weren't aware of what I just showed you a few minutes ago. And then they would run into an issue like that. And then you guys would send messages to me and other people saying, hey, this game doesn't run well. How do I fix this, et cetera, et cetera. Or I saw another content creator's video and they showed that game and, you know, how did they get it to run perfectly fine?
Come on. You know I'm going to blaze through those qualification tests. Like that.
Oh, you in that much of a hurry to get out of my unit?
Lieutenant Dixon, nah, I was just...
Save it. I'm happy for you. You're gonna make a hell of a detective.
Well, hurry up and polish your badge or you're gonna be late.
See, that video looks really nice. We're at 72 right now. Could be better on that end. Notice how it fluctuates when it gets close up on a couple of characters. You don't have a lot of sprites or animations or textures in the background, so the frame per second goes up. And then when it's a wide angle shot, it drops down because there's more textures in the background.
Marcus has been on a beat for 4 years now. Just aced all the CIC stuff. It's all down. Remember.
81%, 83. CPU usage is still very low.
You got it, Vic.
35, 40 on the round. What's going on, Dirty?
Shoot yourself in the foot, huh?
Yeah, you know how many times I keep hearing that? Like PlayStation 2 doesn't work on a Pi 5 or something. It's work. With these new single board computers coming out and people requesting more of it and a more demand, you're going to have to put in the work if you want to get the best out of it. I think for the most part, you know, that day and age of just throwing a ROM on the system and trying to get the best possible performance out of it is dead. So if you really want to enjoy these higher to run systems like PlayStation 2, and there's probably a few others, a lot of them like the Nintendo Switch, they don't have a lot of settings on there for optimizations to improve some things. But if you want to get the most out of it, you're going to have to put some work in, unless you just want to go get a standard PC and you don't want to have to fix anything up for yourself. Again, this board, the Raspberry Pi 5, is about 3 times to 4 times more powerful than this $40 x86 board. And here we have N64 emulation running at full speed. No tweaks, no adjustments, just right out of the box. All right, let's move on forward to the next one. I want to show you guys True Crimes. Is this it? All right, so this is the same game I was just showing you on PlayStation 2 on the Raspberry Pi 5. I don't think I recorded much sound on this. I'm going to let it play through, and you guys will take a look at it. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm going to do a comparison video showing you how this little cheap board can outperform some of the higher end boards that are out there. And there's a lot that hasn't really been discussed for understanding purposes in the retro gaming community. Because if you were to look at a Geekbench score, for example, or any other performance-based score, and I did a poll on that a few days ago, most people would pick an Orange Pi 5 or a Raspberry Pi 5 for emulation. But let's let this play out. I want you guys to remember the video footage that I showed you earlier with PlayStation 2 on the Pi 5, and you be the judge. And I made no tweaks or modifications to this. Cheapo Radxa X2L is pretty amazing at PS2, so for tweaks required, yeah. Some games do require some tweaks on this. So just remember, the next time a home arcade company or somebody says, hey, this board is more powerful than this or that, and then you look at the specs. You know what? Let me pause this for a second. I'm going to pull up the specs Screw it. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, days ahead in advance, but let's pull this up. Let's pull up Kiodiekin's results. Let's go ahead and pause the video because I want you guys to miss out on anything. Let's pull this up. All right, so this AAAA, this is the Radxa X2L. This is an x86 board. The single core score is 375, multi-score 1037. And where does the Raspberry Pi 5 sit at? 870 and 1841. And where does the Orange Pi 5 sit at? 845 and 3000 on the multi-score. And this little thing in terms of PlayStation 2 emulation will literally kick the snot out of these boards. But lo and behold, let somebody else tell you that this low performing score wouldn't be able to run PlayStation 2. Or run it decently. Again, this video doesn't have sound. I think it took me a little while to get off this ladder, so I'll fast forward it a little bit. Yeah, I got stuck there on that ladder. Let's fast forward it. Again, there's no sound here. All right, there we go. There's no sound hiccups on this emulation. Everything ran perfectly fine. It had some little dips or whatever every now and then. What's going on, Damien? It had a little few dips in there in terms of the frames per second, but nowhere near comparable to the Raspberry Pi 5 performance with Retropie. Again, we're using Emulation Station, but you can see the comparable differences between ARM versus x86. And pay attention down here at this bottom right-hand corner, 100%. All right, so we're coming up to the spot in a minute where the game would drop down to about 1 to 2 frames per second. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I had some issues with controls on this one. Yeah, most of these PlayStation 2 games are have an issue with, like, if you're using a 3D based game, open world. The ones that are really hard to emulate are the ones that are open world with a lot of textures and sprites in the background, like let's say your Gran Turismos and so forth. All right, so here we go. Moment of truth. We're at 100%, even though we weren't at 100% on the Raspberry Pi 5. And look at that. Look at that. Just look at that. You see how long it took me just to get to that point earlier in the video on the Raspberry Pi 5? I'm literally going to do a cut and paste side-by-side comparison, but look at that performance. Didn't stutter, didn't hitch, didn't glitch, didn't hiccup. Oh, look, we're about 96%. Let's take that right back. I think you guys need to see that again. Look at that. Same choke point, handle it flawlessly. On a cheaper, lower scoring board because it's x86. So again, definitely can't stress enough, overclocking isn't needed for most of these games. Unfortunately, for me personally, it's been very difficult for me to trust a lot of gaming reviews when I see people with doing some type of retro gaming on a single board computer, because generally, for the most part, somebody's adding some ROMs. They're not optimizing anything. And, you know, just a few weeks ago, we had a number of different people saying that PlayStation 2 emulation on the Pi 5, Raspberry Pi 5 was not possible. So I uploaded a bunch of videos, and now the whole narrative has changed. I know there's some more videos coming out, more images, but it just goes to show you how quickly you could be influenced as a buyer or a customer simply because somebody is trying to put out a video. They didn't spend any time or research trying to optimize the emulator. So they think everything's plug and play. And all right, so with those two clips, that's where you can really see the difference. If I was running Super Mario Brothers, or let's say Sega Mega Drive or Super Nintendo or something really basic, you really wouldn't see it. Or even in some cases, if I was running some basic PlayStation 2 emulation or some games where I optimize them on the Raspberry Pi 5, you wouldn't really see the difference. Again, I made every optimization I possibly could in the world with the Ether emulator on the Raspberry Pi 5, and it still wasn't even there. And then as you can see on the Radxa X2L, it was flawless. I didn't have any issues or whatever. But again, keep in mind, that's my perception of watching it from the Radxa X2L. I have not played that original game on the original PlayStation 2 hardware. So if you guys are familiar with that, that's pretty much the only difference. But from my perception, the game ran fine. It didn't stutter, it didn't hiccup. Obviously, you could see the drastic differences between the two. But again, I'm only able to see that because I found a game where it would lock up or freeze and then compare it to something else. But again, it will be very difficult to do a comparison test. Again, like Super Mario Brothers, your NES, SNES, some of the other basic arcade titles, like let's say your 6-player X-Men or Aliens versus Predator, your Punisher. You're not going to see too much of any differences if you're running lower end systems or lower end games that are very easy to emulate. There are only very rare circumstances where you could see a comparison difference between the two and how they will perform, and that was one of them, and that is the reason why I decided to showcase it here today, and why I also showcase it on the live stream. And you know, myself as well as a few others, we went through a number of these different games to see where we could find the true performance differences. That was one of the games we did go through. Like myself, Pi Maniac, we tested these games on the Raspberry Pi 5. We even tested them on the Orange Pi 5 as well to really draw a difference of performance. But that was really drastic. So I hope you guys continue to watch the rest of the video where I showcase some of the additional clips that I have from the live stream, which is more or less pertained to emulation and overclocking. And again, please keep in mind, look at the performance differences when you're looking at the resource meter that's being used. While I was playing Time Crisis, for example, 62 degrees, I'm sorry, 62 degrees, but 62% for usage on CPU, and 28%, I believe it was, on the RAM. We're not even at 100%. No reason to overclock. Hasn't even reached that threshold. But again, even when I was using the Radxa X2L, I wasn't even tapping out. And I do understand that even the X2L using the x86 chip, it has a turbo boost performance. So it starts out at about 2 gigahertz and then it bumps up to about, I think it's 2.7, 2.9 in terms of performance. But again, it wasn't stressing out. There was still more than enough headroom, but you guys could decide for yourself. So I'm going to continue to let the rest of the video play so you guys can hear the rest of the commentary that I did give during that live stream. This is something else we will be covering much further because there's some other things that we will be talking about in regards to the home arcade community, because I believe we're getting some information. A lot of boards are really being put out in terms of what they, people think they can do, and you guys are running around with your heads chopped off buying every little device out there, and you're getting little to no reward. If you are now getting a single board computer, usually I would say about 40 bucks, especially if it's x86, or maybe even looking at maybe ARM for the most part. You should be running a lot of these higher end systems. Let's say your Sega Saturn, PlayStation 2, even Technoparrot and even Fightcade, all for about $40. So I do have a special message coming up for the home arcade community in regards to in regards to some of these single board computers, in terms of what you should be getting for your money. So with that being said, enjoy the rest of the video. I will catch you guys later. That's why you can run Switch better on some of these single board computers compared to, let's say, Wii U. I know it's funny, you go Wii can run, GameCube can run, and then we take that jump to Nintendo Switch, but Wii U requires a different type of emulator. I believe it uses CEMU in order to run or emulate. So again, I'm not overclocked. This is NHL Pro Hits running at 33%. Let's go ahead and turn up the sound. I want you guys to hear it. But again, keep your eye on the resource meter over there, because as you take a look at this, you'll still hear the stuttering, the flickering, the slowdown. But notice again, the board is not being taxed out. And so once we get up to some of the other emulator settings later on in this clip, you'll see it's running much better. But again, we haven't overclocked anything. We got a quick question here. Alexander King, what do you think about the Raspberry Pi gigabyte instead of 8 gigabytes? Have a big difference between them. Yeah, there is a big difference between them. We've kind of discussed this for the past few years. I know some people say, well, it's just the same board. No, it's not. If you get the 8 gigabyte version, you will be able to access different shaders. I believe when some of the builders actually make their images, there's a cap limit on these images where you could cap it at 4 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes. So yeah, you will get a better performance if you have 8 gigabytes. There's also some additional things coming down the pipeline, such as Twister OS. I'm not sure if they're going to release anything any soon, but you will be able to use double emulation to run an x86 environment. Also, if you do plan on using Windows on this particular board, such as the Raspberry Pi, that would be available, so that extra RAM would increase. But keep in mind too, a lot of people who say get the 4 gigabyte, not the 8 gigabyte, they don't make any of these builds. They have no idea what's going on in the background, what additional system resources are being used. And so they may think that one board is equal to another. Now, I even remember with the Raspberry Pi 4 gigabyte model, there was a chip on there that they put on there. The 8 gigabyte model had it, which allowed you to tap into additional voltage. You could increase the over voltage on that. And the standard 4 gigabyte model originally did not have that. So you really got to be mindful of your specs. Also understand who's making this stuff. If you guys are familiar with that, what was it? That Raspberry 52 Girls, 1 Pi image I did a video on a few weeks ago, that Bill was using Ubuntu as a background. And I think they ran into that issue where they built it off of an 8 gigabyte model. And that's why it used a required 4 gigabytes and more of RAM. So imagine if you use a 4 gigabyte Pi, you wouldn't have been able to log in and really use that particular image because the cap far exceeded the 4 gigabyte limit. All right, so here's our gameplay from NHL Pro Hits. Let's enjoy this for just a few minutes. All right, so this was my first experience. I loaded up the game. This is pretty much its defaulted speed. I think I made a few tweaks to it, but again, it still performed this way. And so, again, just to show you, I'm not overclocking. We're at 2.4 gigahertz. And so let's go ahead and skip forward a little bit. You guys can hear the slowdown. And so, again, normally in most situations, people will overclock, do a video, turn it up, and say, oh, it still doesn't work. I think I still had some slowdown at this point. We were at about 55% speed. All right, we still have some slowdown here. And boom, voila. As you can see, we are now at about 86, anywhere between 86 to about 120% speed. System resources have not changed. I have not overclocked. And now we're getting much better optimization than what we were experiencing just a few minutes ago. We're using 32 gigabytes, 32% on RAM right now, and the CPU is at 73%. Now, unfortunately, we can't see where the video card is or what processing, what percentage the video is at right now, but I haven't tweaked anything other than some basic settings in the emulator. And the gameplay is enjoyable.
And with that, we'll have a face-off. of the puck by O'Neal. I felt that. I really did. Enormous hit. He gets it off. Steered away. And we're going to have a face-off.
Yeah, to be on the safe side, get the 8 gigabyte model. All right, so now we are at 178%. No overclocking. Gameplay is enjoyable. CPU RAM percentage is still the same. And so now we have some great emulation there.
Was seeing stars after this hit. You can bet your bottom.
All right, let's go ahead and pull up another video here. I got another clip I want to show you guys. This one is probably one of the more trickier ones, and I was never able to get this. You know what? I'm not going to pull it up this way. I'm going to bring up True Crimes, Streets of New York. And I think there's some Time Crisis 3 settings in here too, some gameplay. This one's really tricky. I never got this one able to run full speed at all. However, on some of the other single board computers, it does run at full speed. And those are on x86. I'll have some other reviews on that. But let's go ahead and jump in here. You can see some slowdown here for Time Crisis 3. Again, we're not overclocked. CPU's at 38%. RAM's at 29. We got some slowdown here, some slowdown here. I mean, I know how to fix this. This wasn't the issue, but I just recorded it just so you guys can see the actual percentage of resources being used on a single board computer while it's going on. Because again, typically you won't see this kind of stuff. And so, as you can see, we're not overclocked. We're getting better optimization. It's running at a much faster, much better pace than it was just a few moments ago. And this is actually one of the trickier levels to run, even on the Orange Pi. And even some of the PC gamers have problems with this. But again, I will be covering all of this in the upcoming PlayStation 2 emulation tutorial. See, we got full speed here. No more slowdown. Gameplay is enjoyable. And I know I have the system monitoring covered up right now. I know I should have removed it for the sake of this recording, but we're still well within the same percentage range as we were with some of the other games. We're not using full spec of the board. The processing is maximized. But again, these are situations where you guys will watch a video or somebody will say, hey, let's go ahead and overclock, and there's no need to overclock. We got it there. Stock. What is the stock speed? What is it? 600 or whatever on the GPU, something like that on the Raspberry Pi 5. And we're at 2.4 gigahertz on the Raspberry Pi 5. CPU usage is at 27%. RAM is at 27%. And in some cases, I've gotten up to about 140 frames per second. Now, this is a particular game where these video cut screens do kind of resemble or represent a true experience of the true in gameplay. So if I was to let this run and you guys saw the cut screens and demo of Tekken 5 on the PlayStation 2, it would truly represent the actual in-game experience for what you get. Now, I will say, I think I did a live stream a few weeks ago. Don't know what happened, but the audio was a little off, but everything was fine on my end. So I think that has something to do with how my capture card is captured and everything. But the actual gameplay experience and audio is pretty much just fine, but you guys may be hearing a little bit of a delay. But I'll speed this through a little bit forward so you guys can see some actual gameplay. All right, so in this clip, what I was pretty much doing was kind of mess around further with the settings, just to see what additional settings I can add to this. I have it running perfectly fine, but just wanted to see what else I can mess around with this on this particular emulator. Let me turn it down because I know it's kind of loud. But for the most part, there for some of these PlayStation 2 games in this emulator, there's about so far I've discovered about 3 different ways you can optimize it to make everything playable. So there's not one particular way. There's about 3 different ways, and so that's one of the reasons. As you guys see here, is a little bit faster. So that's one of the reasons why I've kind of delayed. Has been a lot of hard work just trying to understand a lot of this. Is because while I'm trying to release my work and my image, I'm trying to release it in the best possible fashion to where it just works and it runs, and I don't have to tell you how to tweak everything for yourselves because some of these games would require you to understand how the emulator works in order to get the best possible optimizations out of it. So, all right, give me a second here. I'm going to pull up another video. In fact, I think I recorded this one. I want to give you guys a little teaser here. Yeah, you guys see it there. Tech is running really good there. It's at 100 frames per second or 60 frames per second, but 100 speed. So let me pull up. Let me see here. I think I got a nice little teaser for you guys. I'm going to show you guys some gameplay from the Radxa XL2. See if I have it. Let's see, how long is this video? Yeah, you guys are going to trip out when you see this. Let me see if this is the right video. Oh, yeah, this is it. All right, so this is a little bit of gameplay from the $40 Radxa XL2. Killer Instinct, full speed, no hiccups, no issues whatsoever. And I believe, is this what I think it is? Let's see what system on. I think this is, yes, it is. This is Retropie X86. So this is Retropie on the X86. This board is cheaper than the X1. This one is $40. They're currently sold out. And so you could see that this $40 X86 single board computer, no overclock. This board, well, I'm cutting into my future review for you guys. I can't believe I'm showing you guys this, but this board is about 2 to 3 times less powerful than an Orange Pi 5 and a Raspberry Pi 5, and it runs this perfectly from Emulation Station and Retropie. All right, here's NFL Blitz. This one had a little bit of an issue. I don't know why. I think it was the sound or something. I mean, I could fix it, but I just thought it was weird. It was kind of spotty on this one, but it ran pretty fine for the most part on the XL2, on the X2L. There's no release date on this, guys. It's just a showcase. Just wanted to show you guys for this right here. All right, we got N64 running fast. Again, this board, the Raspberry Pi 5 is about 3 times to 4 times more powerful than this $40 x86 board. And here we have N64 emulation running at full speed. No tweaks, no adjustments, just right out of the box. All right, let's move on forward to the next one. I want to show you guys True Crimes. Is this it? All right, so this is the same game I was just showing you on PlayStation 2 on the Raspberry Pi 5. I don't think I recorded much sound on this. I'm going to let it play through, and you guys will take a look at it. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm going to do a comparison video showing you how this little cheap board can outperform some of the higher end boards that are out there. And there's a lot that hasn't really been discussed for understanding purposes in the retro gaming community. Because if you were to look at a Geekbench score, for example, or any other performance-based score, and I did a poll on that a few days ago, most people would pick an Orange Pi 5 or a Raspberry Pi 5 for emulation. But let's let this play out. I want you guys to remember the video footage that I showed you earlier with PlayStation 2 on the Pi 5, and you be the judge. And I made no tweaks or modifications to this. Cheapo Radxa X2L is pretty amazing at PS2, so for tweaks required, yeah. Some games do require some tweaks on this. So just remember, the next time a home arcade company or somebody says, hey, this board is more powerful than this or that, and then you look at the specs. You know what? Let me pause this for a second. I'm going to pull up the specs. Screw it. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, days ahead in advance, but let's pull this up. Let's pull up Kiodiekin's results. Let's go ahead and pause the video because I want you guys to miss out on anything. Let's pull this up. All right, so this AAAA, this is the Radxa X2L. This is an x86 board. The single core score is 375, multi-score 1037. And where does the Raspberry Pi 5 sit at? 870 and 1841. And where does the Orange Pi 5 sit at? 845 and 3000 on the multi-score. And this little thing in terms of PlayStation 2 emulation will literally kick the snot out of these boards. But lo and behold, let somebody else tell you that this low performing score wouldn't be able to run PlayStation 2. Or run it decently. Again, this video doesn't have sound. I think it took me a little while to get off this ladder, so I'll fast forward it a little bit. Yeah, I got stuck there on that ladder. Let's fast forward it. Again, there's no sound here. All right, there we go. There's no sound hiccups on this emulation. Everything ran perfectly fine. It has some little dips or whatever every now and then. What's going on, Damien? It had a little few dips in there in terms of the frames per second, but nowhere near comparable to the Raspberry Pi 5 performance with Retropie. Again, we're using Emulation Station, but you can see the comparable differences between ARM versus x86. And pay attention down here at this bottom right-hand corner, 100%. All right, so we're coming up to the spot in a minute where the game would drop down to about 1 to 2 frames per second. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I had some issues with controls on this one. Yeah, most of these PlayStation 2 games are have an issue with, like, if you're using a 3D based game, open world. The ones that are really hard to emulate are the ones that are open world with a lot of textures and sprites in the background, like let's say your Gran Turismos and so forth. All right, so here we go. Moment of truth. We're at 100%, even though we weren't at 100% on the Raspberry Pi 5. And look at that. Look at that. Just look at that. You see how long it took me just to get to that point earlier in the video on the Raspberry Pi 5? I'm literally going to do a cut and paste side-by-side comparison, but look at that performance. Didn't stutter, didn't hitch, didn't glitch, didn't hiccup. Oh, look, we're about 96%. Let's take that right back. I think you guys need to see that again. Look at that. Same choke point, handle it flawlessly. On a cheaper, lower scoring board because it's x86. So again, definitely can't stress enough, overclocking isn't needed for most of these games. Unfortunately, for me personally, it's been very difficult for me to trust a lot of gaming reviews when I see people with doing some type of retro gaming on a single board computer, because generally, for the most part, somebody's adding some ROMs. They're not optimizing anything. And, just a few weeks ago, we had a number of different people saying that PlayStation 2 emulation on the Pi 5, Raspberry Pi 5 was not possible. So I uploaded a bunch of videos, and now the whole narrative has changed. I know there's some more videos coming out, more images, but it just goes to show you how quickly you could be influenced as a buyer or a customer simply because somebody is trying to put out a video. They didn't spend any time or research trying to optimize the emulator. So they think everything's plug and play, and they're going to overclock. And that doesn't work. And then you're led to believe that something can't perform because they simply didn't understand exactly what it is that they're operating with or what it is they're doing. This one is Tekken Tag, had a little bit of slowdown. Obviously, there's no tweaks to this. This is the Radxa X2L, but it is performing much better than the Raspberry Pi 5 using... All right, so here we have some Tekken Tag emulation. Oh, I actually had some voice on that. It is performing much better on this particular board than compared to using Raspberry Pi 5's Retropie. Now, there are some other front ends or OSs that would run a little bit better for the most part. Usually that is Android. If you want to try to get the best possible emulation on most of these single board computers, usually you're going to have to use Android for the most part. I mean, even we have Retropie on the Orange Pi 5, there's still some issues, but we've seen issues where if you use, like, let's say Daijai Show, which uses Android, all this stuff without any tweaks or optimizations is just running phenomenally. Let's see, what game is this? This was me doing some additional testing on the Radxa X2L. I think the emulation on this is much better than it does on the Raspberry Pi 5 without any tweaks. This is Soul Calibur 2, I believe. Again, this is just all default. I haven't changed anything on it, and it's running pretty good for the most part without any tweaks or optimizations added. Let's see, what game is this? All right, Time Crisis 3. This one was really funny. I have this running really good on the Raspberry Pi 5. I don't know why this one gave me an issue with this. Again, it's all in the settings, had nothing to actually do with... I'll turn that down. With the actual performance, but by default, it ran much better than it did on the Raspberry Pi 5 using Retropie. So there we go there. All right, now if you guys notice over here on the bottom in the middle, we have Vulkan. I'm using Vulkan drivers. Frames per second is at 48, so we are at 81%. But notice when I shoot the barrels over on the right. Now, this is typically one of the choke points on the Raspberry Pi 5 is if you're using Vulkan drivers and you have some additional sprites or animations, it could totally just drastically cut down on the performance of the gameplay. So again, using stock, no changes made, and you can see that there's not going to be any issues here or any hiccups. So again, this is a $40 board performing by default because it's x86 outperforming the Raspberry Pi 5 and even the Orange Pi 5. And normally when I run this on the Pi, whether it's Orange Pi 5 or the Raspberry Pi 5, I'm using OpenGL. Again, I'm going to explain all that in the upcoming video, but just wanted to kind of show you guys some of the performance differences and why overclocking is needed. It just has to do with an understanding of the particular emulator that you're using. In this case, it's Ether. So again, to put things in perspective, this is the Radxa X2L outperforming the Raspberry Pi 5. It's cheaper than the Raspberry Pi 5. It's cheaper than the Raspberry Pi 4 and some of the other arcade chips that are out there on the market that people would say that this would outperform. So let me pull up. I'm gonna pull up those numbers again. So this little thing right here is outperforming this down here. I think I'm going to kind of fast forward through Tatsunoko versus Capcom. I'll show a little bit of the gameplay. So, and this is on the Nintendo Wii. Now I fixed the settings on this one, but again, this is just some standard defaulted gameplay. So this is typically what you would get with this kind of board by default, but you can improve it. In fact, even on the Raspberry Pi 5, you still have little hiccups like this, which I've also improved, and you guys will experience when I release my image. It's not that bad, though. Then, of course, I had a little bit of Switch emulation here. I have to figure out the settings for this one. This one's a little bit trickier, but I can, pretty much improve on it. Oh yeah, this the one that was this is PlayStation 3 on the Radxa X2L. This is Soul Calibur, what is it, 3, 4, something like that? This is PlayStation 3 emulation on a $40 board. Just wanted to see if it would work. But it's just nice to know that we can kind of get this performance out of something like that. All right, I think this is more NFL Blitz. Wanted to kind of revisit it a little bit. Pretty strange on this one was like it's kind of sped up and slowed down at times. I'll show you guys some of the footage. So here we go. It's running fast. It's fine. A little slow down there. I think I logged out because I was like, what the heck? And then, of course, cloud gaming worked too. So, but, all in all, that's pretty much where I'm at right now. Just wanted to show you guys, what some of this emulation looks like, on these single board computers with gaming. But, definitely wanted to stress out the point to all of you that you don't need to overclock for any of these single board computers, particularly in regards to emulation. It's not needed. If you want to do it, it's fine. I've done it for to represent a number of different tests, just to see, what the temperatures, would look like, if it would throttle using it, like say a stock Raspberry Pi 5 cooler, or using an additional method, what voltages were safe, what were the optimal voltages, how far could you overclock the GPU. If you're doing a test or something like that, that's pretty much fine. But again, none of that is needed to obtain good or optimal emulation for these single board computers. So unless you guys have any questions, you guys all have a good day. I will be back later. I will have some additional videos released for all of you, but hopefully you guys got something out of this. And this was the prelude to my tutorial that I do plan on watching. And make sure you guys like and subscribe, share the video, and I will catch you guys later.